Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and today I thought we could have a little chat about my first steps into Scandinavian folk magic. A little bit of a disclaimer though beforehand. I'm a little bit ill today, I'm having a sore throat, and I'll probably sound a little bit more raspy than usual, and that's why I have a hot cup of tea, and that's also why I decided to film a more chatty, chill video today, instead of one where I have to prepare a ton of research beforehand. But I know that you like these videos that you can basically use as a podcast, so I guess that will be fine. But yeah, so get yourself a hot cup of tea, like I have, or a snack or something, and let's have a chill one. So we will talk today about Scandinavian folk magic and Scandinavian folk traditions and my way into the practice, because I realized I've never really talked about it on the channel. Only ever whenever I film a haul or something, I've mentioned that I like researching folk magic and folk traditions of Scandinavia, but I never really talked about me actually getting into the practices. I just felt kind of inspired to film a video on this because, yeah, you are my friends out there. You're all my friends, and I like to share my experiences and my journey with you. The longer you practice, the more your practice will change. If I look at the beginning of my practice and now, it's like a 180. It's so different. And yeah, recently my interests have changed again a little bit. Or they have deepened maybe. Maybe that's the better term for it. Maybe I should start with how I actually got into this, because I think it's very interesting. I feel like I just got deeper and deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole. I guess it all started when I became interested in the Viking Age and how people were living in Scandinavia during the Viking Age, and I just did some research about history and archaeology and stuff because I just was interested in that. But that only came when I started practicing magic, which is kind of interesting to me. But as most of you may know, in the beginning as a witch, I was a Wiccan. Actually, I started out as a Wiccan because that was basically the only topic you found whenever you were looking for witchcraft. You found Wicca, so I became a Wiccan. Yeah, but I became interested in the Viking Age and practices during the Viking Age, but not necessarily the magic or the religion or anything like that, just basic human life. But yeah, as you know, I got into Norse paganism and I became a dirty heathen and started working with hell. And I guess that is where it actually started, because when I became interested in working with hell, with that kind of came also working with my ancestors and doing some more research into my ancestry and my heritage. And I did some DNA tests because I knew that I had a huge batch of my ancestry is Scandinavian. I knew that, but I never really dug deeper into that. Yeah, basically with worshipping and working with hell came a more deep dive into my own ancestry and my own heritage. And I guess with that came the fascination for maybe wanting to dive deeper into the actual practices of my ancestors. And I actually found out that a huge part of my ancestry is actually Danish and Swedish. I knew that I have a Swedish great-grandma, and it was just natural that probably a big chunk of my ancestry would be Danish, because I was born and grew up in a city at the Danish border, and both my parents came from there. It was just natural that probably I would have Danish ancestry, but I didn't think that it would be that much. It's actually a huge chunk. That's where kind of my interests kind of shifted a little bit. Beforehand, I was more interested in Icelandic and Old Norse practices. But yeah, I guess by doing more research on my own ancestry, where I'm actually from, where my parents are actually from, there was kind of this spark of wanting to also research the folk traditions and the folk magic in those regions. And beforehand, I wasn't even interested in folk magic to begin with. I always wanted to reconstruct the practices from the Viking Age and beforehand. So the pre-Christian traditions and magic and religion, that was the part that I was focused on. And I never even thought about getting into folk traditions and folk magic. Now I realize with how many Danish folk traditions I actually grew up, and they were just natural to me, and I thought like, that's not special, that's not interesting. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of Europeans, and I guess maybe also white Americans and white Canadians, I don't know. But I feel like for a lot of Europeans, a lot of us think we have to kind of look for something interesting, like spirituality-wise, somewhere else, somewhere far away. I guess that is also why a lot of white Europeans get into like maybe Eastern practices. A lot of us become like Buddhists, or they get interested in, I don't know, New Age spirituality that's very, very appropriative of Eastern practices and Native American practices. And it's kind of this fascination of other people's spirituality and other cultures' spirituality that's just kind of not necessary. I mean, not to say that you're not allowed to be interested in that, but I feel like a lot of white Europeans get into that because they feel like they themselves don't have that culture and they themselves don't have any practices or spirituality, like in their own countries. I guess that was the same for me, and I feel like in hindsight, I feel like that's very sad, because now I know how many rich practices and how much of a rich culture there is to explore, and how much spirituality and magic there is to explore. I was always more focused on somewhere else. In hindsight, as I said, I kind of feel like it's very sad, because there's so much culture here and so many very cool folk traditions that you can get into and that I actually grew up with. Like I now realize that, for example, it was completely normal. I don't know if it's also a thing in southern Germany, but in northern Germany it's completely normal to do Stöpa at New Year's, which is basically pouring molten, originally it was lead, now it's candle wax, into water and then divining with it. We did that. Like I still know that I did that as a child. It was normal for us to do that on New Year's. And then I started my research into like folk magic in Denmark and Sweden and Scandinavia in general. And I realized that that's actually a folk magic tradition, and that is like basically the divination method within Danish and Scandinavian folk magic. That completely messed with my mind. Like I grew up with that and I didn't realize that that's like actually a thing. And when I found that out, I was very baffled. Like I read about that and I was like, what? That's so cool. I grew up with that. And I never really thought that was anything special. I never thought that was actually anything cool. And I guess that will be the case with a lot of folk practices, because that's just the things you do. You don't realize that that's folk magic because it's just the things you do. And I mean, same with other traditions that I grew up with. For example, I grew up with Rummelpottlaufen, which is basically like dressing up as scary creatures and going trick-or-treating, basically. It's very similar to Halloween, but it's on New Year's. And I did some research and I found out that's also a folk magic tradition to basically scare away evil spirits. And I grew up with that. That was just the thing that children did on New Year's. Completely normal to me, but I didn't really think there was anything special about it. And I even grew up with books about the typical house spirit that you would see in Denmark and northern Germany, which is the Nispuk, or I guess in Sweden it's called Nisse, I think. But yeah, here it's called Nispuk, and it's a house spirit, and we still have children's books about the Nispuk at home. And I didn't realize that's a thing. Like, it took me so long to realize that, and now I'm so deep into the rabbit hole. I want to know everything. The only problem is that there aren't that many resources on it. I mean, I know of 2 books about Scandinavian folk magic in English, but that's about it. And I know of none in German. And I guess that will be the struggle of my life now, to find resources in English and German. Or I'll have to learn Danish. And that is a thing that I'm trying to resist at the moment, because I found a language school online where you can learn all Scandinavian languages. And I'm so tempted to start learning Danish, but the thing is, I don't really have the time. So I have to resist, because it doesn't make sense to start doing it, learn it for like 2 months, and then realize I don't have the time and stop again. But yeah, I guess if I really want to do a lot of research, I will have to learn Danish and Swedish probably, which will be interesting. But yeah, there aren't that many resources in German or in English. If you have some, I would gladly know where to find them, even if it's websites or articles or anything. If you have any resources about Scandinavian folk magic, please put them in the comments for everyone to see and to find. But yeah, that is where I'm finding myself at the moment. Kind of, it feels like spiritually finding a home within my own ancestry, and that is extremely, extremely lovely and satisfying. I don't know, other cultures' practices may feel very interesting because they're so different, but I don't know, to me now, diving into the practices of my ancestors feels just very homey. I feel like that's kind of a trend at the moment in witchcraft circles, to get into the folk magic and the folk traditions of your ancestors, and I feel that's a great thing, especially because it prevents you from culturally appropriating other people's cultures. But yeah, I kind of love to see how many people dive into their ancestry and into the practices of their ancestors. Yeah, it makes me very, very happy to see. And because I know that there will probably a lot of people who will ask which resources I use to learn about Scandinavian folk magic and Scandinavian folk traditions. As I said, I only have like 2 books about especially Scandinavian folk magic in English. One of them is Trolldom, Spells and Methods of the Norse Folk Magic Tradition by Johannes Björn Godbeck. I hope that I'm pronouncing that name correctly. And the other one is Svartkonstböcker, a compendium of the Swedish Black Art book tradition by Dr. Thomas K. Johnson. I have only read the first one, the Trolldom book, which is amazing. I haven't read the second one yet, it's a thickie. But yeah, the other books that I use, unfortunately, are all in German, and they're basically all about fairy tales and folk tales and superstitions in Denmark and in the northern parts of Germany, because I feel like I'm saying that all over and over and over again. The northernmost part of Germany, the part where I'm from, has been Danish for the longest time, and that's why the traditions here and the folk tales here are very Danish. So the books that I'm using, I'm always showing them in halls and stuff, so you will find the books that I'm reading, but they're all in German. They're all basically folk tales, fairy tales from those regions. And I'm trying to just reconstruct some stuff. Reconstructing that is kind of hard. Also getting into the folk magic part is kind of hard, because not a lot of it is something that you could or should practice today. I will make a separate video on that also at some point, as soon as I feel like I have enough knowledge. But it's a lot of graveyard stuff, a lot of digging up dead people and stealing their bones. Like making a brew out of dead people's bones and stuff like that. Stuff that you probably shouldn't do nowadays. Don't do that. So yeah, you kind of have to find a way to reconstruct it in a more modern way that you can legally practice nowadays. I just wanted to give you a quick update and just ramble about it a little bit, because I'm just so excited about diving into this topic and reconnecting with my ancestors in that way. It kind of feels right to not only dive into the pre-Christian practices of Scandinavia and especially Denmark and Sweden, but also the more modern folk magic and folk traditions, even if they are very Christian. I don't really want to work with any Christian elements. I'm just not comfortable doing that, but luckily there are still pagan elements in actually a lot of pagan elements in Scandinavian folk magic, so I'll just have to pick and choose, or like paganize the Christian elements. We will see. But yeah, those were my first steps into Scandinavian folk magic and Scandinavian folk traditions. It feels very right. It feels like home. Yeah, I guess that is everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope that it was kind of interesting. I just wanted to give you a quick update and kind of ramble about something that I'm extremely passionate about at the moment. I hope you got something out of this video, even if it was just basically like chilling with a friend, or having something to listen to in the background while doing something else. Before I stop the video though, as always, patron shout out. Thank you very, very much to Ingi, I guess Ingi, Bresky, Prince Adlin's boyfriend, JB, Karina, Tim, Anna, Qboard, Maud, Lorna, Alexander, Laura, Amber, Kristen, John, Ivy, Phoenix, Anton, Noemi, Jenny, Tyler, Els, Betty, Misty, Cameron, Tiffany, Amy, Colette, Soren, Braden, Tell, Timothy, Coffee or the Honorary Gossip Squirrel, Bjorn, Scylla, Ash, and Lucy. Thank you very, 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 very much. And now, as always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up. And of course, check out my other shenanigans on TikTok and Instagram. You can, of course, always check out my online shop. And if you maybe want to consider supporting my channel, then you can check out my Patreon. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!